Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you've been enjoying the day up till now. What we've seen is what you've been hearing, your mega trends and metrics across the industry verticals, and how the apps landscape is changing, and others also. With that view, the data becomes of utmost importance. And this session, we are actually concentrating on how data is important, how it can be leveraged, and how it can provide you the edge both on the client side or the enterprise side as well as for the service providers, and how they can leverage this to up their game, both contractually, financially, as well as on the performance front. I am joined by my esteemed panelists, Anuj and Chirag, and I welcome all of you. Before we start with our discussion, let me introduce our panelist. Anuj is a senior director with Avasant and has more than 18 years of experience in the industry. He is on the benchmarking side. And Chirag Sharma, who is on the advisory side of the Avasant organization. He carries more than 18 years of experience. I'll be the moderator for this session. I'm also a senior director with the firm on the benchmarking side. And thank you, Anuj and Chirag, for joining us. And thank you for the audience to listen through this. So, Anuj, Chirag, we've been listening about the application landscape changing, and how the metrics have evolved over every industry view. In today's rapidly evolving digital economy, data is, I guess, data has also shifted from being important to being actually at the cornerstone of every strategic decision making, be it for the provider or for the enterprise. While enterprises use data contractually via benchmarking or contract health checks or inviting us for various cost optimizations and other organizational changes or structural changes, while providers have been using this data to up their game on the deal making as well as the renewals that are of utmost importance because you need to preserve the business. So with that in mind, how do you see data actually impacting the ability to manage a client? If we can
Yeah,
focus specifically around how the service providers can leverage data to improve the client management as well as providing long-term success to the enterprises.
sure. So I'll just do a quick walkthrough of what the cycle is. So client, of course, has to make a critical business decision, and they are requiring Avasant's expertise, sourcing expertise, to help them guide through that decision. But we do bring in that data and research capabilities, and it's critical at every juncture, right from the strategy phase when they are still deciding what to do with this area, specific area, the budget that they are holding. So they want an assessment. How do I compare to my peers, industry peers? That's where we are not even talking about a financial benchmark or anything, just knowing what my peers are doing. It can be consumed in terms of market research, it can be industry peer research, looking at overall spending, overall staffing. So it guides their strategy thereon. Eventually, when they make a decision, we have to help them realize the value that comes out of that decision, not just selecting the right solution, right partner. We also help them once they have that right solution and partner in place, they have a contractual relationship. How do they ensure there is no value leakage happening? Again, there is data required for that also, because once they have done some market analysis, who's the right partner for them, they have done the market benchmarks, signed the contract, but now how's the contract? It's a long-term relationship, 5 years. It's a long time. You can lose track of things. That's again where we help them track on the solution, give them the governance solution where they can get the data to ensure that the financial and performance parameters are met during that relationship. So it's, to me, it's hard to think of an area where data is not critical throughout the journey that we have with our clients. Like, it's very critical at every juncture. Just the consumption may change, the kind of data format may change, the kind of data how they consume may change. So that changes a lot, and that has actually helped us evolve our definition of benchmarking also, because when we started, we were also pretty much focused on what the contracts are saying, let's build a model around it. But it has eventually obviously been growing around what client really needs. And that goes much beyond what the numbers are telling us, right? They also want to know, as I mentioned, how what their peers are doing, what is the future outlook. So Avasant also has to provide them insights on how the future outlook would look like. So yes, data is critical in throughout this journey.
Thanks, Anuj. Chirag, you would want to put in some perspective on the from the client side?
Yeah. So if I try to take a step back, maybe look at 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, the traditional wisdom around outsourcing has been that if you are a supplier in a relationship, you need to focus on good delivery, make sure you meet all your performance requirements, make sure your client is happy, the perception of the services is good. And if you do all those things right, then you can expect more business and you can expect renewals in time. Right? That has been the conventional wisdom. Increasingly, we are seeing that we are being invited into client relationships where the clients don't seem to have a specific burning issue with the providers, and yet they are not sure 6 months, 1 year, 2 year down the line if this relationship would make sense, how should this relationship be evolving, and if they should still be looking outside the market. So essentially, all those things that we thought were sufficient to renew have now become hygiene matters, right? And clients are really looking for us to tell them, based on the data that we see today, what would the future look like and how we as suppliers would enable them in that future. Right? And I think that's the challenge about how you manage your client relationships that all suppliers will feel. And this is something that we have noticed increasingly across the spectrum, across the industries.
So, good point, Chirag and Anuj and Chirag. What I would like to actually understand is, while we have data, right? Data is there, but then it is imperative to actually harness. You should have a ability to actually harness that data and make it useful, across various factors like, governance, your operational performance, as well as risk management. How do you have you seen any challenges, in actually harnessing that data? First of all, is, collation is one aspect, and then, comes the how do you harness the data or work on that data to have a critical outcome which you can translate into, any operational improvement. Your thoughts, Anuj and Chirag,
Sure.
on that?
Sure. So if I just talk from benchmarking perspective, for example, and that is something I've been doing for 8 years now, working both with service providers and clients, and sometimes both of them are involved in a single transaction. So earlier, it was quite common for us to be involved just when a renewal is about to come, right? It's a quick check. How's the pricing? Is it fine? Should we go to the market? Let's negotiate based on the benchmarking outcome, and we'll take it forward from there. And if the deal term was like 3+1+1, it was assumed +1 will happen, +1 will happen. So there was an auto renewal kind of mindset, both from service provider and client, unless there was no major delivery failures or service failures happening. That has changed, and it has not changed like suddenly. That's a change we have been noticing for last 3 years at least. And how it has changed is now the client doesn't just want to make a financial assessment. They just don't want to leave it at that, okay, the pricing looks fine or not. They are also assessing that what is my business mandate. The CIO has to understand the business mandate, and is this part still the right partner for me to take me to that journey? And often the biggest challenge we see is that the client environment has evolved. It has transformed, especially since almost every client is on cloud now. The contract structure that they had in place initially is kind of outdated now. The resource units and the structures that they had were inflexible for their new realities. And that's something that either the client will suffer, or sometimes even the provider suffers a lot, because neither of them would have clarity in what is the key requirements for the current environment. And that's where I think a lot of the times when we are brought in just when the renewal is around the corner, there are a lot of surprises coming up in terms of, okay, what you have been tracking is probably not relevant for your environment anymore. You don't have all the relevant data at this stage. And to counter this, now we start with benchmarking at least 18 months before the renewal.
Correct.
So that at least we can assess where you stand right now. Are there any things we need to amend before we even start with baselining? Because quite often a rebaselining is required. We need to revisit the changes that have happened in your environment, and those are not small changes. They may be big changes going beyond the recorded change requests. So that's where I think we have to dig deeper to ensure there are no surprises coming up and the overall renewal timeline goes out smoothly. So that's where I think, if not 18 months, even midterm assessment would help. And it doesn't have to be a deep dive assessment. Just looking into things, how attuned are you to the current environment? That itself helps us give them like a usable result when it will come from a benchmark. Because intent is that whatever their timeline is, that should not get disrupted. For that, we have to ensure they have the right kind of data.
Correct. So before I come to you, Chirag, I just wanted to add to what Anuj said. Anuj rightly said that, while in our experience, it's not just as Anuj said, it's not just about cost optimization these days. You have to realign to your client's business requirements, right? So we've been over the past 6 months or 8 months, we've been reached out by service providers themselves that they are on the renewal path proactively, not reactively, but and they want to realign, reassess their solution, solution strategy right from the start of an operating model right down to the pricing inputs. So that has come out. On the client side, Chirag, do you want to pitch in how your experience has been?
So, keeping with the theme of data and the challenges, I'll share a quick anecdote. We have a healthcare provider client, and traditionally, we all probably would agree that healthcare providers have been laggards and slow in technology adoption, in leveraging their data for any kind of business insights as compared to any other industry vertical. Now, this healthcare provider, they decided to talk to 20 other of their competitors in the healthcare provider space, pool in their resources together, and decided to come up with, well, when I say pool in their resources, pool in their data, electronic health records data from all of those 20 providers was pooled in. They created abstract layers on top, made sure it is HIPAA compliant. And the whole intent behind that was that they want to take this EHR data, map it with all the closed claims data to create a ready uh, compliance hardened data set that can be used for drug discovery, that can be used for targeted medicine, and that would essentially shorten the time period that it takes for all kinds of clinical trials, the dependence on registries, and all the inefficiencies that come with those. They used it for genome mapping, all kinds of things they were doing, right? And we were talking to them about their experience with this, and we asked them, okay, who are you partnering with beyond the client from a technology perspective, insights perspective? And they said, we have a hyperscaler here for the technology enablement around it, but there was no provider in the ecosystem that we found that could really draw the insights. So all the insights part, all of that work we had to do in-house. And to me, that was very profound, and for two reasons. One, because this showed that business part of the enterprise is getting exposed to all of this new technology so much that they are themselves not scared of taking up these initiatives directly without having to go through their CIO organizations or without talking to their suppliers. They are not scared of the underlying technology because all of that has been commoditized. So one thing is they themselves feel confident about taking these initiatives on their own, and that's something that should give us all of us a pause. The second one, the second important insight that or inference that I got from that was they felt no one in their existing ecosystem would have been up to that task of leveraging this data, creating that abstract layer, and putting it to good use. How do we let that happen? As suppliers, this perception that the client may have, now we can park it aside as an oversight on their part, maybe they don't know us enough, but this perception that they have that our supplier people in our supplier ecosystem don't understand our business data at a sufficient depth that they can draw insights for us, that is in my view a huge challenge for our industry, right? So clients are expecting us to not just look at our performance data, not just look at the data that we generate, but to look at all the business data that passes through our hands and give them insights. And I think that's where the next wave of spending is really going to come from.
Thank you, Chirag. So actually, you mentioned quite interestingly various aspects of data, and that brings me to the next topic in terms of, now data falls into multiple categories, or buckets. Let's call it. Financials, which typically drive your cost optimizations strategies as well as investment strategies. Your performance related data, which is basically more towards your service quality and continuous improvement, as well as your contractual related data, which is towards compliance and regulatory obligations.
Yeah.
So, given these bucketization of data, how have you seen, Chirag? Let's start from you. On the client side, the importance where these buckets lie. I know everything is important at the end of the day, but then still, if in your experience, how have you seen clients react to the data in various buckets?
Okay, so let's look at each of these buckets, starting with the financial data. Typically, how we have seen deals being sized and priced is you have your FTE benchmarks, you have your productivity benchmarks. There is a resource pyramid that you have. You add some technology cost to it, you add some risk factors, and you come up with a pricing model based on a few other factors that you may have. But traditionally, that is how we have been pricing these deals. The challenge that clients have with this kind of a pricing model is, with the advent of AI, the resource pyramid as we see it is no longer a pyramid. It's likely to become like a rhombus. The bottommost layer is likely to be impacted the most. The productivity numbers that we have typically had for an individual or one resource, those numbers are getting challenged now. So with that, when we have these traditional pricing models of how we leverage financial data, those pricing models, do they work today is the question that clients have. Now, club that with the contractual part of our discussions that we have typically with them. And the clients are asking us, your 3-year contract with this kind of a transaction-based pricing model, or anything that you do in terms of this contracting practices, 6 months down the line, when the industry suddenly shifts and I'm forced to adopt a new technology solution or a new platform, is this contract really going to enable that transformation? Or is this contract going to become an albatross around my neck? Right? So that's the conversation that they are interested in. That's the thing that they are struggling with in terms of how we look at all of these data elements, how we are bringing them together. And is there a way to maybe pivot and change the way we look at commercial models, at our contractual models, and enable them in their transformation journey, enable them to deal with that change that keeps hitting them every 6 months, every 1 year as they see it.
Right. Anuj, you want to throw some light on from the benchmarking
Sure.
perspective?
Yeah. See, rather than bucketizing data, I see what is it informing? What decision is it informing? So if the client is really looking at their overall budget, they, as I mentioned, they want to know what my industry peers are doing.
Correct.
And even if we talk about technology budget, they want to understand I'm spending this much on people, this much on technologies across technology areas. How do I reallocate this? That's where a lot of our benchmarks are needed. They look at their overall staffing. And when I say overall staffing, it's not just their employees, it's also the workforce that are coming from managed service providers. It is also the workforce coming through contractors. So that's something part of your workforce. You have to support the business, the scale of business, which may be defined by the revenue growth, by the user base that you're supporting. So that's the data that they need. And it usually is spending and staffing, but they also look for industry spends, industry trends specific to their peer group. And they are very, very critical or very, very analytical in terms of what are the peer group you are comparing me against. So the clients want to know, because quite often our like sponsorship has changed from CIO to CFO, and they also want to ensure that because it's a spend area, I want to understand every aspect what you are comparing me against. So that's how the data may bucketize into financial and performance, but it is informing a different kind of decision. Based on that, the outcome that we get, we will help them build a roadmap, and that roadmap will prioritize which are the vendors you probably need to start having discussions with, because
Right.
specifically the benchmark may point them that you need to invest more in SaaS because your peers are investing more in SaaS and their data center spend and cloud spend has considerably lower allocation than yours. So accordingly, they will prioritize their discussion with that kind of vendor. So that informs their decision which are the vendors that I need to prioritize, because vendor list can be immense. And based on that, we may also recommend them, why don't you go for a vendor consolidation? That may be one of the outcomes that may come out. We help them select the contracts which are going to benchmark. So that again will be the area where the price benchmark data would come in. So the data will be informing the decision of the roadmap actions that we are helping them with. So the data that they're using in the beginning and the data they eventually use would be vastly different, coming from different data sets altogether. And accordingly, we help them out. So benchmarking, as I see, is never restricted to the pricing, market price that we have seen, right? So it goes much beyond that. And a lot of the times, as I mentioned, based on what decision is being informed, it will take shape and form.
Correct. And it rightly said that, I mean, at the end of the day, again, to the first question that we have been discussing, that, the proper alignment between the service provider and the client's business. I'm specifically using the word business here. So that is of utmost importance nowadays, or let's say probably post-COVID days, last 2-3 years, is how the landscape has changed, how the thought process has changed from the client's side. It is not gone are the days probably, when benchmarking data was, and Anuj, you can chime also, that benchmarking was utilized typically by the service providers nowadays, or by
Client
the
as well.
clients as a part of the contract. Nowadays, both of service providers as well as the enterprises are using benchmarks, are trying to reassess and realign the service delivery models as well as the methodology for that matter, to align themselves better as compared to their industry peers. So with that, in the starting of the discussion, Chirag and Anuj, both of you mentioned that gone are the days where renewals were on an auto mode. Nowadays, clients are looking for a vendor whom they can trust and have a strategic intent with, towards renewals. So with that in mind, how do you foresee the impact of data, and the ability of any service provider to grow a relationship within a client?
Okay, I'll start with the anecdote. Yeah, I'll share an anecdote here because that's very relevant in terms of understanding like the dynamics that we are dealing with here. So we were engaged for a contractual benchmark by a healthcare provider, and the service provider was a tier one uh, uh, service provider, right, with like global footprint and everything. And yes, the client was not specific in terms of the issue they are facing. They just invoked the contractual clause for benchmarking, and that's how we got involved. And while we were assessing the contract, of course, because it was a benchmarking clause, we had to hear both sides of story, both the service provider and the client. And we could hear from the client's end, it was like, we don't know about service and all seems fine, but I am not sure if they are the right partner for me. You help us assess that. right? So benchmarking is one of the ways to inform that decision, that they feel something is wrong, just they cannot put their finger on it. So let's start with benchmarking. That's how the client started with it. From service providers end, they were sharing the challenges they have been facing because of the contract structure. It being a fixed price contract in certain service lines and the volume increasing, they have been pouring in people from their end just to be that reliable partner, keeping the service levels up, keeping things up and running. But they were feeling that client is not acknowledging their efforts sufficiently. Their margins were getting hurt. So provider also had their side of story, though they couldn't back it up with a lot of data while we were discussing that. And again, some of it was fundamentally the structure of the contract that was inflexible and the changes that has happened in the client environment. And service provider was a catalyst in that. That was the mandate. It was their mandate to transform the environment. They have transformed the environment, but the contract structure that they had in pre-transformation wasn't serving either of them well, because client wasn't sure if things are going well. They had no idea, and service provider was saying that it is hurting us financially. And the benchmark did show that the price was actually below the market median, right? And even though service provider felt vindicated with that outcome, that yes, see, we were telling you we are below market median and everything, in our separate discussion with client, with the CIO, he was saying that fine, okay, you have given me a unit price, they are charging me below that, but does that make it well if I just increase it by a couple of dollars, like per unit pricing? Would it serve? Would my leadership be happy with that? He explained, right? I have a much higher mandate and a much higher budget now from my business. I have to impact the business directly. Is this the right partner for me? Yes, they have done the work in terms of helping me transform my environment, helping us go 100% cloud, everything, yes. But I don't think they are my right partner going forward now. That's the doubt that they had in mind. Because, and why the CIO was bringing in that, calling in this question is because they never heard from the service provider team come up with the ideas. They felt it was a very instructional relationship. They had to inform everything, and the service provider was doing it. And service provider on their end, they were saying, we have been a nice partner to you, standing through thick and thin, and they felt underappreciated. And digging deeper, what we realized is because yes, service provider and they were not making enough margins, their whole focus was on just making sure service levels go up and running at the current cost that they were challenges that they were facing. They failed to bring in the expertise needed for this new environment, or they chose not to bring it, not failed. They chose not to bring it because that was not an investment they were prepared to make.
Correct.
And because we had data around the service providers from our market research, that it's not like the service provider doesn't have the capabilities. It's the account management's decision at service providers and not to engage them with the client. And as per the client, that is this the right service provider? That question kept on cropping up. Because they were asking, they have never shown me any industry solutions. They have never brought in any industry expert. So why not go for a partner? Why shouldn't I go for a partner who brings in that expertise? Who is my partner in this extended journey that I'm looking at, right? Where my business expects me to directly impact the business. Because as I mentioned, right, we had some knowledge about the service providers from our market research. At least we could have that discussion with the service provider also, and to some extent amend that relationship, right? So even though, whereas service provider was barely looking to improve margins, that was their sole focus area, they forgot about the expansion opportunities that lie ahead of them. And that's where they were not even having that conversation with the client, that what are the expansion opportunities that lie ahead of them. And client was doubting whether you are the right partner. Yes, you are taking care of things. All the service measurements were green, but are these the right service measures? You have never recommended me any new service measures. Why is that the case? Right? So performance metrics have evolved. You have never recommended anything new for me. Right? So as a healthcare provider, my challenges are very, very different than beyond. They go much beyond technology. You need to help me identify where technology can help. So I think once those things were brought on table, they were able to amend their relationship, and to an extent, the provider also had a scope of expanding, going beyond what they were already had. So expansion could have only resulted if the service client feels that you are the right partner for that increased scope. If you just fail to make the client realize that, and are probably too stuck on the very account level economics, you can miss out on those opportunities. So that's where I think we also strongly recommended that the benchmarking or overall sourcing health check should ideally happen during mid of contract, so that you have enough opportunities to amend the challenges you were facing both ways. Because in this case, the service provider was the one who was getting hammered from cross side, right?
Correct.
So it would have been beneficial for them only to do a sourcing health check much earlier in the cycle. So that's, I think, that did expand our horizon also, in terms of that you have to, it's not just always beating on the price, it's not about the price in
Correct.
terms of benchmarking, we have to look beyond that.
Right. No, thank you, Anuj, for sharing this example. And I mean, again, the importance of data and the insights, how the client, Chirag, your thoughts on how, it can be leveraged to build and, the client relationship.
So I'll take a similar example to what Anuj just shared. We were brought into a relationship that on which the first generation of the deal we had advised, and some 12 to 18 months before the contract was to expire, we were brought in again, and the problem statement as it was shared with us was that this is not working out. Our business is not at all happy, and there is a lot of entrenchment that has happened. There is an adversarial relationship. We have brought you in here to tell us who is at fault. Is it the problem from the client side or from the supplier side? That was the one-line statement. Who is at fault? We went there. This was an existing relationship. We knew the supplier well. We knew the client as well. We started looking at the data. We looked at their performance data, the cost, the budget, the business value, and we asked them a question that we know you have brought us here to talk about who's at fault, who has done what. Along with that discussion, can we also talk about what would it take to sever this relationship? And based on that discussion, we created a business case with scenarios of what would a severance look like. Along with that discussion, then we posed another question. Is disentanglement the only option? And we started looking at various other scenarios. Retaining them, moving to someone, bringing in-house, all of those. And we showed them what would it take with each of those scenarios in terms of the business risk, the cost, the performance hit, all of those things. So it gave them a pause. Now that they had seen all these scenarios, then we asked them the next question, which is there a way to make this work? The current relationship work, what would it take? And we brought people in, and while doing this, we had been on listening tours. The client made us go to their business stakeholders to hear their complaints. And we heard two things very consistently. One, they would all say, XX vendor is the problem, we don't like them, I don't think we can work with them. So we will have the conversation, we'll ask, okay, who do you like amongst all of the people that you're working in that value chain? And they'll name a person, and that person was always from the same XX vendor. So they had a perception that XX vendor is not working, but they always seem to like a person from that vendor no matter who you talk to. So we realized that it's not as clear as they think it is. And that's where we started asking all these questions. So we brought them on the table again, and we started talking about what would it take to fix this. And they started talking to each other, and it turned out that there were a lot more problems on the client side. They had never really bothered to set the supplier for success, which is where all of this noise was coming in. So they decided that, okay, let's renew this, let's see what we can. And that's where the final question that was asked is, how do we reset the whole thing? How do we really set it up for success? And that's where they are today. They have renewed for another 5 years, and they have become a reference client for this supplier. So it was all about looking at the data and trying to figure out how does that data align with all the noise that we are hearing from the business.
Thank you, Chirag. I guess the time's over already. It was an engaging discussion. Thank you, Anuj and Chirag, and thank you, audience, for listening in patiently. We've summed up the importance of data and the edge that it can provide, whether it is existing relationship or in any prospective client. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.